Hi everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here. It's great to see many people on this afternoon. So we're gathered here for a rather somber affair. But although not all remembrance, is sad, because it might be a chance for us to work through the loss, and this is the point of the event that we're having today in memory of Richard. We're here to remember Richard, who was a dear colleague, a friend to some here, husband, a mentor, and a member of AUB faculty who served AUB in Lebanon from 1993 to 2016. Richard's biography is not a usual one by the measures of, let's say, a career academic today. It feels like that with his loss, we kind of lost a type of intellectual and humanist that may be harder and harder to come by these days and as time goes by. Richard was born in Darjeeling and died in Tyre. Already in that, there's a lot that is singular. His life was punctuated by his intellectual commitments, if one just looks at his biography. And I think these intellectual commitments, for those who knew him, were somewhat consistent and unwavering. From Darjeeling to Cambridge to the Amazon to Jordan and then to Beirut. Richard was always very careful with generalities. He was meticulous about specificities and very curious about singularities. And he was open to contingency, surprise, and chance. I mean, he went from mathematics to anthropology, for instance, a discipline that was dear to him because of its ability to allow for a critical reflection on mechanisms of power, governmentality, which was something that occupied Richard in his work. And I think as a student, I did take a course with him on Foucault's account of governmentality, which was, of course, full of loads of papers and books and lots of details. It's not just an idea. It's in the records. That's the kind of the way he approached it. So he was committed to the discipline of anthropology, which was allowed for a critical reflection on mechanisms of power, governmentality, and knowledge production. Richard was allergic to conservatism, yet he was keenly committed to understanding the ways through which norms and laws came to be set in place. And as a son of one of the last Indian civil servants or colonial administrators, Richard spent his life doing perhaps the exact opposite, documenting and historicizing the myriad forms of governance, colonial, imperial, and otherwise. He is now laid to rest in Tyre, overlooking from a hill his beloved Palestine, which, as Martha will say, or probably will tell, I mean, this was perhaps a place that he, in passing, joked and said, this is a place to spend eternity. Unfortunately, but perhaps fortunately, he did get a spot in that cemetery. So I remember Richard as a teacher, as a colleague, and as a colleague. He had an acute sense of listening and just the right degree of skepticism that always pushed one to articulate better what they had to say. He was generous, he was considerate, he was level-headed, and he was a stickler for detail with a wry sense of humor. So we gather here to remember him today, and we will hear short testimonials from his wife and lifelong partner and collaborator, Martha Mundi, from his colleagues and friends, Maher Jarrar and Sonia Atasi, as well as two of his former students, Muhannad Hariri and Samar Ghanem. So thanks for being here and listening to the event as it proceeds and what people will say. Okay. Martha, you want to?
Screen, so we don't.
Oh, is it blank?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Liberally. Oh, I see Glenn Gould there, but anyway. Yeah. I want to thank Nadia in particular and Tom and the others for organizing this event to remember Richard. In part of my remarks, I think I'll overlap a bit with Nadia, but not all of them. As you may know, Richard died from a traumatic head injury. And this prompted me to reflect on what kind of a sociological intelligence was his. Richard was a fine editor, having been trained young in the craft of English prose. But his first discipline, as we've heard, was mathematics, from which he moved to sociology. I say sociology because in Delhi, anthropology is sociology, and I think he would embrace the wider term as well. In any spare moment throughout his life, he played number games. But for sociology, it wasn't statistics that he valued, but the extraction of pattern out of lists and sums, a modeling spatial intelligence that corresponded to his pleasure in mapping the relations of people to space and to nature. Later today, I gather you to see a clip concerning the 1965 trip, which his friend Jonathan Ambash, Jonathan died in 1968 in Biafra, 3 years later after their trip, organized to the Choco of Colombia. The two hitchhiked from New York City to Panama, took an aeroplane to Colombia with a hunting gun in the plane, by the way, and from the coast went upriver with local boats. A documentary was later made concerning what they had done and left. Perhaps it's from this that you are to see a segment. But by then, conflict, in which, of course, the USA played its role, meant that the latter-day filmmakers were not permitted to go upriver to the Choco. Richard was ashamed of the characterization of their trip as an expedition, but fond of the music and images that the two had recorded. He had a musical culture. Richard had played the violin quite well, but stopped on going to India, where he came to understand, but not to play, classical Indian music. Thus, it was not, as he put it, bows and arrows anthropology, in which his close friends Stephen and Christine Hugh Jones were in fact to excel, that he would come to pursue. But as Nadia has implied, but through both love of a girlfriend and of his professor Jeet Singh Uberoi, both of whom were Sikhs, or are Sikhs, still alive, and anger, he would strive to dissect the sociology of the Raj, during the last years of which his father had served and into which he had been born. His birth certificate. Richard's 1971 Delhi University M.Lit analyzed the administrative categorical fixation of both caste and religion of persons, according to localities, in the Punjab census. From that he went on to the Land Records Office of Ludhiana, Punjab, for almost 5 years, on the understanding that the administration of agrarian tax settlement formed the backbone of rule and knowledge under the British Raj. His work entailed both a critique of the administrative systems of knowledge, as in the essay, Rule by Records, Rule by Reports, complementary aspects of the British imperial rule of law, and reconstruction of rural patterns of life at the onset of such registration, as in the first map I showed you. This office-based fieldwork also entailed an unpopular critique of the tendency of historians not to venture beyond the central archive. I should keep these remarks short, and so I won't go into work we subsequently did together on rural histories of Greater Syria. Let me leave simply with what, so far as I understand it, a word on what AUB allowed and did not allow to Richard. Given the streaming of education in the United Kingdom, Richard welcomed studying great texts, not least the philosophical, that were the core of the old CS program. In a sense, teaching these allowed him to complete his own education. He had mathematics, sociology, and then a fair dose of philosophy and literature. And so he did regret the reduction of the program a decade or more ago in what a colleague of mine at LSE used to term the sweetie trolley approach to a curriculum. And lastly, many years earlier than the reduction of CS requirements, He deeply regretted the refusal of the SBS department, the Social and Behavioral Studies department, as it was then, and but it is so am today, to countenance having Jeet Singh Uberoy as visiting professor. A word about Richard's taskmaster and severe model. Jeet had moved from an M.Lit restudy of Bronislaw Malinowski's work that was published as The Politics of the Kula Ring in 1962, to refusing the role of native informant for Western anthropology by doing doctoral fieldwork in Afghanistan and not India, to a semiological critique of Western science and the academy in Science and Culture, 1987, and The Other Mind of Europe, Goethe as scientist in 1984, to a bitter understanding of the colonized histories of religion in book Religion, Civil Society and the State, a study in Sikhism, published in 1996. Close by the sea that he loved, Richard was buried in the Christian cemetery of Sur, but accompanied then and thereafter by myriad recitations of the Fatiha by Muslim friends. And in Delhi, on learning of Richard's death, Jeet read the Ardas, the final Sikh prayer. And he was reading the final Sikh prayer. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I've written this afternoon some thoughts, so I'm going to read them and then I'm going to distribute one of the lectures, a handout of one of brilliant lectures used to be given by Richard. Now I'll talk about it in a minute. And I start directly by saying Richard was a dear colleague. I won't say a friend, but a very dear colleague whom I miss a lot, and I think most of us at CVSP and this university miss a lot. Richard was genuinely warm individual, brave and compassionate, although it took me some time to understand his manner, his approach. He, at some points at the beginning, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, one thinks that he's a little bit, perhaps, not very friendly, if I may put it this way. But then I discovered he's very honest and very passionate. When I joined CVSP in 1998, Richard had been already there since 1993. So I started then attending classes with my colleagues in order to recapture the spirit of CVSP. I say the spirit because I studied at this university, so I attended 4 CVSP courses. But as a student, now you need to understand what is exactly this program. So I started attending with my colleagues then courses to learn more about the sequence, as we called it, and observing both teachers and students. So I visited Richard's classes oftentimes. And I'm proud to regard myself as Richard as my mentor. Richard clearly formulated the objectives and requirements of the course at the beginning of the semester. He started off with an informative and inspiring humanistic, I would say, introduction, focusing on the meaning of civilization, and I'm coming to this in a minute, and the resonant role of the human being in making cultures. Richard approached teaching as a true partnership between teachers and students, between himself as teacher, very much involved and engaged, and students. He was permanently well-prepared, enthusiastic, and his classes were disciplined, yet challenging, if I may put it this way. In fact, it took me some time to appreciate Richard's way of thinking towards different venues of our work together at CVSP and his particular approach to things. Richard was a genuinely honest and passionate person, as I discovered with time, who defended his ideas with consistency, especially when he is arguing a cause of general interest for CVSP or for the community at large, and especially for students, or when debating an intellectual matter or proposing an idea or a new model. With time, I learned to understand his temperament as that of someone who unpretentiously stood by what he believed was righteous and as a means of common good. At that point, I felt that I'm becoming very close to Richard, and he became really a dear colleague over time, with very much respect for him. One of my vivid memories of Richard as a candid and intellectual debater goes back to the academic year 1999-2000. Martha just mentioned when CVSP was being cut down to 2 courses, and we had a long debate, meetings. At that time, the program consisted of 30 members from all across departments at AUB. We were undergoing a thorough revision, I will put it now, and this should be at some point, by the way, someone should write about it, or more than one, who experienced that time. Revision, I would say, restructuring process. In one of the long meetings with late Provost Heath, the issue of changing the name of the program arose, and the name Cultural Studies was proposed. It took us 2-3 hours discussion. Richard was very vibrant, arguing against. I still recall Richard's astute intellectual arguments for keeping the term civilization and encountering the more idealistic German term Kultur. Now, this is a vexed debate in academia, which has a long history. However, I'll stop at Richard. Richard's worldview was more anthropologically based, and he was trying to bring the discussion towards a global South approach, not only civilization, French, afterwards British, and Kultur, the more idealistic, as I said, German. He was trying to bring the whole thing to here in Lebanon, where he teaches, where we teach, where CVSP is a very important program in the forming of the education, intellectual education, mental education of students. So this impressed me a lot. His approach, not only to the theoretical vexed debate that most of us know about, but the way Richard approached intellectually, astutely this thing. So his approach engendered a novel perspective to the whole issue, according to my understanding. Now, Richard was integral in the development, his role was integral in the development of the revised program, although he was against, cutting down, but we had to live with it. We had to cut from 4 down to 2 and restructure, rethink the whole thing. Now we are going down to, I don't know where are we heading to. But I mean, it's a bright future, and I see Nadia especially working on it. We're heading towards something new. We still have lots of the spirit of CVSP, not anymore great books. Why great books, okay? Books, why canon? So respecting what Richard did, but going now towards new horizons, new perspectives. So Richard has contributed a lot, and I think positively, to modeling and modernizing the CVSP program and the curriculum. Although, as I said, he was all the time astutely, intellectually debating and defending his position. He was really able to shine in sharp interchanges, not only in discussing curricular and administrative issues relating to faculty and students' rights, for that matter, but mainly with his students when he shifts towards a compassionate attitude, never condescending and always perceptive. Yani, I've seen Richard arguing intellectually, very astutely, with colleagues, with intellectuals, with the administration. And I've seen him dealing with students open-minded, openly, as Nadia mentioned, and she is a student. I still can see him now sitting on a chair in his office, the keyboard on his lap, and he briskly, I would say, configuring his research results as a basic DOS. He never used Word, up to my knowledge. I would go inside, and he has this thing, and he's running on the thing, and I would ask him, Richard, where is the computer itself? Yani? He would laugh, he would smile, his bright smile with his teeth, and says, this is DOS. Never using never using Word or more elaborate versions, for that matter. To my mind, and I respect him as a very dear colleague, Richard might have been a bit difficult, to my understanding. But through his dignity, honesty, and grace, Richard endeared himself to many around this university, many students. I truly miss his presence at CVSP. He helped build a sense of community at CVSP. Another vivid memory, which will never fade away, was the opportunity to enjoy each semester. I made it a point each semester to attend Richard giving his very cunning lecture on the Odyssey, on Odysseus, weaving a design. And perhaps we can please take one. By the way, I tried to find the video. We used to have the videos at CVSP. Thanks to our clever secretary, we're using the videos. I lost at least my video on Marx. I was trying to find the Richards. It used to be on Google as well. They just disappeared. It would have been lovely to hear Richard giving the lecture very passionately. And it was then I knew it was passion. So I'm finishing. So I never missed this opportunity to enjoy each semester by attending his very cunning lecture on the Odyssey. This has always been a wonderful experience, both on the intellectual level and the acoustic, hence the spiritual. Richard, in a sense, is shy. He's very honest, he's shy. When he gives his lecture, he's taken with the lecture, and his voice betrays his passion. When he stops at aletheia and aletheia, and he makes a point and introduces these terms to the students, Richard would be taken totally by the Odyssey. Aletheia is the truth. It's uncovering, unveiling, but it came to be meant as truth. And aletheia is wandering. And I think this is the life of Richard, as Nadia have said, as Martha have also mentioned. His own Odyssey, from India to South Lebanon, via Europe, his Nostos, journey back to Tyre. Journey back, I think, I would say, at the shore of the Mediterranean, and as everyone mentioned, and on the border witnessing for truth and justice, and that was really dear, I think, to Richard's heart. For me personally, it has been a joy and a privilege to have known Richard, to have been a colleague of Richard. This is particularly a difficult and painful time for Martha, and we all, I myself, extend my heartfelt condolences, but Richard will still, I think, remain a dear member, a dear colleague of this university, especially of CVSP. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. First of all, thank you very much, Nadia, for bringing us together. I would just like to share a few memories about Richard as a colleague, a very dear colleague, my chairperson, so my boss, also a mentor, a friend and family in Beirut. So I was part of the CVSP program as an assistant professor, and at the time I think I was the only female professorial rank in the program. Unfortunately, Nadia had not yet joined it. It was mainly, sorry if I say it like this, a bunch of full male professors, and then you had a lot of female instructors. Fortunately now this has changed, so it was sometimes a bit difficult, but I had a lot of support actually, first with Maher as chair and then with Richard as chair. And he actually made it a point that we should all teach all CVSP core courses. So once we had taught them all, we would be able to choose, but first we had to kind of work ourselves through the core courses in order to really get to know the program. And I think this was very good training, and maybe it allowed me, like him also, to educate, to teach myself. So this is something that Martha pointed out earlier. He was someone who would give very good advice, so someone also you could confide in and you could trust. So I remember asking him for advice actually a number of times. As was pointed out, he had a very dry sense of humor, which would really make our lives so much more pleasant at AUB and in Beirut. I remember when I went up for promotion from assistant to associate professor, he, I think at that point, was a chairperson of CVSP, and I had submitted, my book was not yet out, but I had submitted the proofs, and he came back to me with a list of corrections. So he had really read every single word. And this is something rather rare, right? So he was very, very really paid a lot of attention to detail, and was very generous also, reading and giving feedback to, in particular, maybe junior colleagues, and that was very, very helpful. As I said earlier, he was also and became more and more a dear friend and family in Beirut. I remember organizing together with John Pedro Schwartz, who unfortunately was not promoted to this day, I don't know why, and consequently left AUB. I organized the CVSP forum in the form of an international conference on collecting practices. And this was back in 2008, and I had invited Richard's brother, Charles Saumarez Smith, who at the time was the director of London's National Gallery. And I think it was the first time maybe that Charles was visiting Richard in Beirut. So it was also a very kind of nice brotherly coming together of the two. Richard, John Pedro and I were to meet the day or 2 days after the conference, and when I didn't show up for that meeting, Richard actually came to our house and ran in the street, ran into my husband and told him, "I'm worried Sonia didn't show up." And then my husband told him, she's in hospital, she just gave birth. So I had given birth a month early. And Richard, apparently I only know this from what my husband told me, so he started crying, and he came to see me at hospital. And for me, this was something, at the time we didn't have family in Beirut, so it really meant a lot to me. So he was the first person really then, after my husband, to visit me at hospital. I also recall a number of invitations, actually, that Martha and Richard, at your house at Manara, you would have friends, colleagues over. I also remember you and him coming over to our house, a number of common friends. Richard kept in touch with me after I left CVSP, so I moved from CVSP out to the English department, not very far, just another building across the Green Oval. So he would sometimes come over for a cup of tea, and I really, looking back at these visits, these were very dear visits for me. I also recall visiting Martha and him in Sur together with Livia and our spouses and kids. And I remember that when we visited you, we actually sat by the restaurant at the sea, where he is now, next to the cemetery, where he is now buried. I wish I had visited him more often in Sur. And also, I regret in a way that I didn't ask him more questions. So he was always kind of giving advice, and he was a very good listener, I think. And I regret that I didn't ask him more about his time in India and also about his relation to the sea. And I wish we had more occasions, opportunities, actually, to sit together. So after you moved to Sur, and then with the pandemic, actually, I had not seen him for a while. So I was deeply shocked when I learned about his sudden death, but it is, for me, very, how should I say, it's you know, it makes a big difference to know, and I want to thank you, Martha, that you have chosen his burial place by the sea in Sur. First of all, it's a beautiful spot, and it's a spot that resembles him, but also it makes me feel that I can go and pay him a visit. So thank you very much, Martha.
Hi. So I was Richard's student, 2008, 9, 10, something like that. And I took a class with him, and it was the first time I'd met him in the class. And there was a couple of sessions, I think, and then I discovered that he lives very close to my family's house. So one day, I was walking to campus, and I had his class at 9:30, and he was going there too. And I remember I was on the street, and I saw him. I was like, "This is weird. I don't want to walk with him there." And like, he's on the other side of the road, and so we're just walking. We get to the class, and we sit down, and he says, "Hello," and I know that he had seen me the entire time walking there. So, and then every Tuesday, Thursday, the same thing would happen. I'm like a freak following this guy around. And I one day, I just tried to be late. And he was late too. And I turned the corner, and he's not on that side of the road. He's on this side of the road, and he says, "Aha." And we just had to, we walked, and we broke the ice, so it was a lot of fun. He was, after that, I took many courses with him. I audited courses. I even took a graduate course with some people that are here. Although I wasn't a graduate student, but he encouraged me to sit in on the course. And honestly, I think he taught me how to read and to write more than anyone else he always told me slow down all the time. Like all the time, just slow down and think about what you're saying. What are you writing about? These sorts of things. And I really do owe him a lot for teaching me how to write carefully, how to also think about what I want to say, but also for encouraging me. I think he was always someone that, someone mentioned that he gave good advice. He really did give very good advice. And I hope he never told anyone the things I told him, because we used to have a lot of conversations, and he was a really good friend in that respect. But the other thing that happened was, I can't remember what it was, but anyway. I don't want to talk for ages or anything like that, because I also didn't know much about his work. I used to always ask him, I looked at his book and I said, this looks like a tax sheet. There's no anthropology here. And he said, it's in the details. And that's the thing I remembered I wanted to say, is that he opened my eyes to the fact that you could be really immersed in a place. And I guess that's what he was trying to do with his book. He was using all the statistical data to see pre-colonial India and how it became the colonial entity that it was. But I'd never seen anyone do that with so many numbers. And I remember I even looked at a review of his book. It was like written in 1998, sorry. And the guy wrote this kind of bland review, just seemed like he maybe didn't read the book, but he just sort of like bland review. And then at the end he said some criticisms. The book is so full of detail that maybe most people, it's not going to be a bestseller, fine. Then the next thing he said was that he didn't really link it to any debates that are current, in the field. And I remember reading it then, and I read it again this morning because I wanted to just remember some of the things I knew about him. And it never seemed to me like he wanted to be current, He really was very good at being where he was. And I used to like to see him on campus. I used to like to see him on Bliss. Eventually, I started liking to see him on Bliss Street. I used to like to see him, just being the calm, slow-talking, careful-thinking guy that he was. He also wrote a letter for, I wanted to go to graduate school. He wrote me a letter that honestly, I sometimes still look at that letter. I still have it. I'm not supposed to have a copy of the letter. I had one. I still sometimes look at it because honestly, he saw something in me that I didn't really believe in. But I think with time, he taught me even after that. I haven't seen him since 2011, something. So it's been quite some time. So it was really, really miserable when I heard. I was shocked. Actually, I couldn't believe it. Like, ooh, that's just the craziest story I've ever heard. So it was. Anyway, I'm glad that we've done this, and glad to make you remember a good thing about him at least. Yeah. And thank you.
I'm not so good with the public speaking and the words like Muhannad. So Muhannad and I were actually in the same class with, where'd you go? Richard, yeah. Since you all know him, and I will allow myself to be a bit nervous. I only took one class with Richard, so how much I knew him was way beyond that particular class. I would say more privately as a mentor. And I actually think most of my colleagues at the time or classmates at the time probably had no idea that I was close to him beyond that one class that I took. And that he was someone that I visited often, so everyone's saying the same thing, that he was, and he listened, is someone you could confide in, that you could trust in. And for me, personally, someone it gave me happiness to see. And it is someone I wanted to see often on campus. So it was a very small class I first took with him, anthropological theory, as a grad student. Muhannad and Sarah, I don't know if were in the class together, and one more person. And I think it was one of the most foundational courses and enriching courses that I took. It was different than any other class I had been to. My background was also not anthropology, so it was really the first kind of theoretical course I took, which, come to think of it, I don't know how I made it into the grad program without a strong theoretical, but anyways, here I am now. So it was different, and it's where I was really introduced to the discipline really well, and also really introduced into Richard really outside of the classroom. He opened me up, and the way he taught, the details, completely different approach to learning just opened me up to a whole different way of learning, but also understanding things and thinking, how to think, how to read the details. He made us go through the old journals of the Royal Anthropological Institute. And it didn't make sense to me at first, but so even though that was the only course I took, somehow I kept in touch. I was on campus. I was a student. I kept working here. I've been here forever. So for whatever reason, I kept seeing him very often. And I can't say exactly why, but he became probably the only person, or two people, that I really trusted, and that I went to regularly. I would see him after my work or in between my breaks, or for all sorts of advice, again, opinions, direction, in all kinds of matters that had to do with so many things: student activism, issues with the administration, grad school, you name it. And at the time, I was a really active student on campus as well, politically active, and even when I started work, I was. And there was so much value in seeing him and getting direction from him. I trusted him a lot, and his words meant a lot, but oftentimes his silence also meant a lot as well. He was a lot of support to a lot of people. Everyone has said the exact same thing, that he was so supportive, and he was very patient, very kind, incredibly generous with his time and with his support and with his guidance. He also guided me through grad school applications, calming a lot of panicked moments. And through that, really, he taught me directly and indirectly this value of patience, of critical observation, and also confidence. To have a bit of confidence when I was navigating, especially teaching for the first time. So don't quote me on this, but I have this distinct memory of being very nervous as a first-time teacher, and I'm not sure what to do. And I'm pretty sure he said, sometimes you just have to wing it, and just go with the flow. And it's something that's still in my mind for now. And so his humor is also mentioned a lot, something that I really cherished. I don't think that there is anyone in AUB that I enjoyed spending so much time with, nor did I spend that much time with anyone in AUB. So it made me happy. This is a bit centered around our experiences and our memories of him. It was fun. I couldn't think of a better word, but it was fun. Something I really enjoyed. It was. I always looked forward to it. It always made me happier. It always made me feel better, more hopeful. I can't really explain it, and I hope he enjoyed partially, at least, these interactions as much as I did. I would love to say that this kind of continued, but life kind of gets in the way. I had a child, there was a pandemic, so on and so forth. And the last time I saw Richard, I was actually really heavily pregnant, and I saw him on campus, and I just I ran to him and I hugged him, which I was surprised that I did at the time, but I did, and I'm glad I did. I knew how he was doing because of a mutual friend that we had, so I always knew, how he was doing. But I was shocked like everyone else, and I felt a deep loss because we tend to take for granted that people will be around. Actually, I was planning with this mutual friend, we were talking about visiting him on her next trip here. But I am really happy to be at least being able to share this with people who knew him, people who cared about him, people who loved him, and just really grateful for the impact that he had on so many people, but especially on my life. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for your words and for being here. I think we're going to show a short 2-minute selection from a video that is a result of a project put together by Alba Colomo and Nathaniel Mann, which documents the fieldwork of Jonathan Ambache and Richard Saumarez Smith. Ambache and Smith traveled to the Amazon in 1965 and conducted field recordings of the indigenous Choco people. And the clip is of Fausto, a community leader of the Choco in 2014, speaking about and reflecting on the pictures and recordings that Richard and his friend had put together. And I have to say, I watched the whole thing. I think it would be nice if people watch the whole thing. And it's really intriguing that Richard recorded a storm. And you can hear his fellow traveler telling him, why are we doing this? And, it's just the sound of the storm is something that I think is quite interesting in this clip. Thomas, do you want to say something? I mean, Thomas has organized all this. So
I'm gonna put the clip up,
Yeah.
and if you guys want the video, I can send it along afterwards. So that way everyone can see the whole thing. But this is a 2-minute clip. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know how to do that. Oh. Oh, that's the volume. No, that's the volume. Oh, can you turn that one back up, though? That's the volume. Okay.
Yo haría un museo con esa foto en mi casa. Siento de que sí está muy bonito y fíjate, es tan bonito. Todo esto es tan que pues se puede hacer miles de cosas. Siento de que esto puede servir para ayudar a reconstruir un pueblo. Es decir, desde que esto como es que es el quiénes somos y como es que pensar quiénes somos, qué hacemos ahora. Y como es que si esto, como que hacer un paréntesis, si sirve frente a la realidad que hemos vivido. Como es que, ¿será que yo quiero vivir así? O siento de que la realidad ahorita en el momento es mucho mejor. Con unas condiciones, vivir así, pero con unas condiciones mejoradas. O avanzar y perder el espacio que teníamos anteriormente. Siento de que esto sí, como construir, por intermedio de la foto, construir un pueblo. Miremos esta foto con ellos, con los indígenas, y sería chévere como la misma comunidad, si existiera, que yo creo que sí existe. Mirarla cómo está y mirar qué se puede mejorar desde este punto, desde aquí. Y como es que si ustedes reconocen a alguien de aquí. Es decir, solo con una persona que se alcance a reconocer a alguien y te diga, está enterrado ahí, eso es un súper trabajo.
All right, thank you, everyone. There are snacks and drinks outside. Please help yourselves.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.